For most people, the idea of recovering out loud fills them with anxiety and incites an instant cringe. All those stories, all that shame, why would you share it with other people? But often at some point in one's journey, they realize that their story has the potential to lead others to the same freedom they've found. When you found freedom from addiction, it's natural to want to help others find their way there too. In this episode, we are joined by John, Corey, Kristyna, and Jeff, who've all chosen to talk openly about their journey to sobriety. Some have gone fully public, talking about it in front of huge audiences. Others have quietly shared bits and pieces with people close to them. These are their stories, the fears they faced, the fulfillment they gained, and how their experiences with recovering out loud turned out.
Welcome to Through the Glass Recovery Podcast, where we believe that connection is the opposite of addiction, vulnerability is the antidote to shame, and that recovery isn't just rewarding, but it's also a lot of fun. We're your hosts, Steve and Julie. Listen as we get together with friends to shed light on the hard things, talk about the other side of addiction, and how we create a life so full, there's no space left for alcohol.
If you have thought about recovering out loud and want the chance to share your story, please reach out to us. We would love to have you join us on the show for an episode. We give you the option to remain completely anonymous if you want to share your story to help others, but aren't ready to go fully public. Send us an email at throughtheglassrecovery@gmail.com if you would like to chat about how you can be a guest. Hello and welcome. It's nice to see so many new faces hanging out with us today. This is going to be so much fun. So thank you for being here. Welcome to Through the Glass Recovery Podcast. This is episode number 126. We're just flying through the numbers these days. We're going to do some quick introductions and let these folks share a little bit about themselves with you guys before we jump into the conversation. I'm going to put John on the spot because he's been here before, so you can show everybody how it's done.
Well, thanks for having me, Julie. I'm John. I am a practicing physician and a husband and the father of two in Portland, Oregon. And I have been sober for a little over 3 years.
Huh?
Yeah. So I've actually known John since like the very, very beginning of our sobriety. So yeah, really cool to have you back. Really great to see you.
I'll just add it really quick if you don't mind. That when I'm talking things here, I'm just talking as an alcoholic in recovery. This is not, unless I say so, like my professional medical point of view, but just as another alcoholic.
Yeah, I love it. No, that's perfect. And thanks for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, it's good to see you. We're going to keep going. Kristyna, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name's Kristyna. I'm from South Jersey. Go Birds. I am closing out on day 216, alcohol-free today. I am a wife. I have 2 sons. They are 9 and 8. And I'm going to be at my job as a claims manager for 27 years this February. So that's
awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for letting us be your very first podcast. I am so excited.
Yep.
Yeah, good to see you. Good to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Corey, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for having me on, Julie and Steve. I got sober at 22 and I celebrated 14 years last year. So we're in 2025, so I'll have thank you. 15 years, God willing, in May. And I am a father now of 2 girls. We just had our second girl 6 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. They're 14 months apart. So as you can imagine, it's been quite crazy the last few weeks. And frankly, yeah. And then as far as my profession, I just kind of went out on a limb more recently. I think that's how we got connected. I started a golf wellness company that's focused on the intersection of sobriety and golf and exploring the ways that golf can be a complement to your recovery journey. So, yeah, excited to be here and thanks for having me.
Can you tell us what that's called and the website and a little bit everything else? Because people are listening. You might as well tell them about it.
Yeah, so it's called Soba Golf, SOBA Golf, and it can be found at soba.golf. And if you want to join, it's soba.golf/join. And yeah, we're doing a whole bunch of stuff. We're doing golf wellness retreats where we're pairing the ability to play great golf courses while also pairing it with breathwork training and meditation and yoga, as well as getting connected in your local community. So that's another aspect. And then digitally, we have a platform to get connected with people in your local area, but also get support with accountability or with nutrition, working out, and all these different things. So we're just kind of looking at golf as a way to express how sobriety can be looked at in a different way.
Sounds like the launch pad for a bunch of other things to go along with it. Sounds really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's a really unique take, and I think that's amazing. Also, congratulations on the little one. I know you must have your hands full, so thank you for making time to hang out with us tonight.
Always, always. Thank you.
Yeah, and then last but not least, we've got Jeff.
Hey, I'm Jeff. I'm Jeff Breedlove. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and what that means for me is that I've known the Hope and Joy recovery for 8 years, after 30 years of active addiction, and I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I am married. My wife Catherine and I've been married 30 years. She stood by me through the worst and the best days of 30 years of marriage. And then we have one son. His name is Jack. Just graduated from undergraduate school at college, and he's sort of my proof that God is real. Else the adoption was a real blessing. The whole time I was in active addiction, I was a staffer in different government or political campaigns or government offices the entire time, and it worked until I got arrested in October of 2016 when I was the chief of staff to an elected official and charged with a felony and made the Atlanta news market for 5 days and social media for many more days than that. And now later, I work for two entities. One is the Georgia Council for Recovery, which is a wonderful organization. They're all over social media, all the major platforms at just Georgia Council for Recovery. And the one that you see behind me, the American Addiction Recovery Association, which of course works on a national scope, which combines the voices of families and survivors together, which we think is unique. And it is an advocacy organization, but not just at the governmental level, but within the business community, the faith community, the education community, which is where we think real change occurs beyond just government. We have 4 major projects. The one that I'll share now is what we call the Purple Project. The co-founder of AARA is Scott Cochran, who's a brother of ours in recovery. We're all special in that way, but he's got something most of us don't have, and that's 8 national championship football rings. He's coached at LSU, Alabama, and Georgia. His wife saved his life with Narcan when he was a coach at the University of Georgia. He stepped away from coaching to save his life. And so Coach and I go around the country, and he's going to spearhead what we call the Purple Project. And we're launching it. We actually launched it this past September, but it's going to really go into effect September 2025. Nike and some of the others are on board. And we'll have on college football teams some variant of purple, whether it's their helmet, their mouthpiece, wristbands, whatever, a jersey, whatever it ends up being for that team. And we'll have dozens of Division 1, 2, and 3 teams doing that on the 3rd Saturday in September of 2025. But there'll be even more high schools from coast to coast already lined up where these players will be wearing purple. And what we hope happens is that, in Georgia, we have this thing called Waffle House. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It's you can go to a high school game on a Friday night in Georgia, and in the stands will be the bank president of that local bank, and sitting next to and his kids playing, and the Waffle House waitress, her son's playing. And we want to reach everybody in the community, from the bank president to the waitress at Waffle House, and the unity of football to have people to start talking about addiction when they see purple, which is our color during Recovery Month. And that's just one of our projects, and that's just some of the stuff that I've been blessed to do in recovery.
Really cool. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I love the anything that brings awareness and even just makes it a part of the conversation is so, so valuable. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love it. Make sure you send us links so that our listeners can check out what you're doing and follow along and support that also. So, yeah. So, for our topic tonight, you guys, maybe one of the scariest things for people is talking about their sobriety with others. There are a lot of reasons for it. Some worry about how it will affect their jobs if word gets out that they're sober. Others worry about how it will affect their social life. And there's always that overarching what will people think anxiety that floats around. So, what were your worries? When did you decide to start talking openly about your recovery? What happened when you did? Anybody is welcome to start, and we'll just dive into a conversation.
It's a free for all now.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. It's a great question because for me, this has been a new chapter of my recovery. 12-step recovery was a big part of my life. And, you know, one of the words in that is anonymous. So it's quite interesting to put myself out there and sort of be a face for what recovery can look like. Um, so, historically, I have talked about it with people that have asked questions beyond like, why aren't you drinking tonight? And or if I feel like I could be of service to people, historically, like on Facebook or social media, maybe I'd write like the number 5 or 6. And the people that knew what that meant, they knew what it meant, and the rest, were sort of scratching their head a little bit. Um, what's happened to me more recently, I'm 36 now. I have 2 kids. I'm very secure in my recovery. I have a great community around me, and I don't know, with this project that I'm working on with Soba, you know, golf has kind of been synonymous with this drinking culture. And I just have been transformed by the game. It might sound crazy to some. I didn't expect it to happen, but during COVID, I started playing golf. I had never played before. And what happened to me was, I kind of got obsessed with the craft of the game. And over the last 4 years, I've gotten more and more proficient in the game, which is really cool. And I'm happy about my growth as a better player. But what was more interesting were the parallels between the game of golf and the sobriety journey. So there were some skills that I got, like resilience and grit and determination and mindfulness, all these sort of things that I think could be really useful in the sobriety journey. And this time last year, something happened with me, and I just felt like a seed was planted, and I just started working towards what I have now with what Soba is. And so there's no right or wrong answer. If you want to talk about it, I'm so happy that you do. And if you don't, that's okay too. At this point, it felt important to share. And yeah, I don't know if that's helpful or if that's the answer you guys want, but and I guess the last thing I would say is that things have shifted over the last couple of years. I think that the culture is changing. I think that people are more interested to talk about it, to hear about it. I think businesses and companies are more supportive, and there are more resources out there. And with that sort of shifting of the culture, I do think it's more available to have these conversations and support one another.
And I think what you said right there, the culture is changing. That's exactly what Jeff was talking about when he talks about bringing addiction into the conversation. And it does the every time any of us sit here and have these conversations for other people to listen, it makes it a little bit less scary to start talking about your own experiences and you know, have that courage to put your voice to it also. So, yeah, I really love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
I'll say, I mean, for me, it's been quite the emotional and faith-based journey for me, and I've really gone from one extreme to the other, from complete shame and at 50 years old, having made the news and facing a felony and going to a treatment center, just shame and embarrassment and guilt. And I thought I'd graduate. I didn't even know what treatment meant. I certainly didn't know what recovery meant. I thought I'd graduate and be better, and I'd never talk about it again. And I knew that I wasn't famous like Robert Downey Jr., but I knew I didn't have anonymity either because Google links don't go away.
This is true.
I had been fired, and I wasn't sure if my wife would divorce me or not. I didn't, so if I was going to meet somebody or apply for a job, I didn't know how to make get past human resources. So I didn't have anonymity from one perspective. And I really struggled in treatment and in early recovery. Thank God for my sponsor. Um, on how do I address this? And then I was in treatment with a doctor. John, my roommate, is a heart surgeon. My other roommate is a Delta Airlines pilot, and I had another roommate who's an accountant, and had all these other. Ours was sex separate, and all these other men that did everything from a city of Boston police officer to teachers to lawyers, and I understood how they could go back to work intellectually. I started to grasp that. But I was like, well, who's going to hire? And crack was my drug of choice. Who's going to hire the crackhead to run their political campaign or their government office? That I couldn't figure that out. And I learned about this recovery community on a long journey, and I learned about RCOs, the recovery community organizations, and harm reduction, and all this work that people do. And some folks approached me about, well, look, you've learned all these skills in government and politics. Why don't you bring all the stuff you learned trying to elect people and do generic work running a congressional office and focus on your issue? And for whatever reason, people haven't asked me to leave yet. Now I've been blessed to talk about it. Along that journey, my first cousin is the same age I am. And he is an elected official himself, a local elected official on his local school board in a suburban and metro Atlanta county. And he's in recovery, and he's been in recovery for near 30 years. Drug of choice, alcohol, got a DUI when he was younger, heart trouble, decided to get into recovery and stop drinking. And he's married with kids, and he runs for school board, and he gets elected 4 times, but he never told anybody. He was always worried that it would come out in his campaigns. And he goes to AA still every day, but he did come out, so to speak, at a school board meeting, and he talked to his AA chapter and his sponsor and me and these other people. And what I've learned is that my cousin, he needed AA, he needed anonymity for his own recovery, and that was more important to him than an election to office, to a job, to anything. He needed what he needed for his recovery. And on his terms, he decided to tell his whole community, as an elected official, I want to help students and teachers in our school system, and I want to break stigma, and it's okay. There's drugs and alcohol in our school, and let's help these kids. But he did it on his timeline for his recovery.
Yeah.
Me, I never had that anonymity. I just went out there in the beginning. And I think there's multiple pathways to recovery. And I think there's multiple pathways for, there's 6 of us on this screen. And no matter what choice we have, whether it's exclusively anonymity all the way or just completely public, it's whatever works for that person so that they maintain recovery at a personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
Yeah, that was well said for sure.
Mm.
John or Kristyna?
I was going to say it was somebody recovering out loud that really got me to start to question my own relationship with alcohol. I have a friend of mine, Karen, who is actually going to be celebrating 13 years the end of January. And we partied with the same people. We were always at the bars together, everything. And she started posting about how she stopped drinking. And I was like thinking, I'm like, well, geez, if she could do this, I could do this too. And I always thought that I wanted to talk to her about it. And I was just really nervous to talk to her about it because I was afraid I would fail. And I didn't really know what to say. So then finally, I actually did finally speak to her. It was April of last year, right before I decided to really stop drinking. And it was a night she was DJing at a bar, but she was sober. I was not. And before I started drinking, I talked to her and I told her that I had been thinking about it since she had stopped drinking, 12 years ago. Um, so she's like, "Oh, well, reach out to me anytime." So I actually did reach out to her today and I told her I was going to talk about it. This is a made fizzle. I did. I reached out to her. I was like, "I wanna be on a podcast, and I just wanna talk about it, just wanna make sure she was cool with it." So, yeah, so then it's like, it took me I waited till 90 days until I posted about my own sobriety, and I had so many people actually reach out to me that, um, asking me questions about it, and wanting to try it themselves or just to congratulate me and, it's just I think that really letting people know, when you're ready to talk about it, um, it can help anybody, and I feel like that's what we really wanna do, right? So, yeah.
How when you posted about it publicly, how did you feel about that affecting you and your workplace?
I was fine with it, honestly, and I still haven't really told my boss. I mean, I was at the Christmas party a couple weeks ago not drinking, but he didn't even notice. But my supervisor, who is a very close friend of mine, she, I've talked to her about stopping drinking a lot through the years, and she drinks a lot too. And she always told me though that I didn't have a problem. And I finally though got to the point where I just thought to myself, if I think it's a problem, then it's a problem. So I actually didn't tell her till I think it was like 36 days, and she was shocked and she was upset that I didn't tell her. She was proud of me. So, and I
That's really
honestly
cool that she was proud of you, though.
yeah, and I think that she doesn't talk to me much about her drinking anymore, but I feel like it kind of might have had an effect on her drinking behavior. I feel like she might, I don't know, might have hit her somewhere.
Mhm. Yeah, and you never know who's seeing the stuff you're posting that isn't reaching out, that isn't even hitting the like button. I remember when somebody would post, like, I would see something come through on Facebook, even like an old high school friend or whatever, and I would see it, and I would process it, like, it hits you in the, like, I don't know, it makes you feel guilty, and it makes you like, you need to do something about this, right? And then you see that post, like, I wouldn't even hit the like button. I couldn't bring myself to do it. So you never know who's seeing even just a quick Facebook post about, celebrating 180 days or whatever, that it's making those wheels turn in their heads.
Yeah,
And you never hear about it until one day they decide to do something.
yeah,
Yeah, for me, I think that the out loud part was coupled by the fact that in my line of work, we don't always get to choose. The kind of the background to this is when I was still drinking, my first mentor in medicine lost his medical license after multiple run-ins with the state medical board for good. He'd been, I mean, I had known him personally as well. He'd been very successful, the whole thing, and like a story out of the big book, lost a lot. And those are public board actions. They're on the internet for everybody to download and read. And in part, that kept me in fear of saying anything, of reaching out for help, of doing anything. It was just like, I got to figure this out on my own. And it was becoming increasingly clear that it wasn't working. And, you know, the bottom was pretty bleak of like, I know I'm going to have to not only lose this battle with alcohol, but like I'm going to publicly humiliated in my family and the whole thing before I finally crash. And I was just sort of like waiting for that till about a week and a half before I met Julie in my first meeting. And like, I hadn't had a drink since. Um, but it also meant like there's a lot of incentive in the field. If you kind of get in the first shot and you come in and say, I need help, there's a considerable advantage to getting yourself not just help and support, that's sometimes professionally aimed, like for people who are in medicine, but also sparing you the worst of the consequences. And I was still too afraid to do that. But once I had 90 days, I told my boss, and I was like, okay. And like, I hadn't been performing fine at work. My boss was like, what are you talking about? But okay, that's great. And I did sort of want to point out two things. I said, one, be quick to call me out on this. Like, if there's a problem, say something, because, again, getting it early is better. But two, like, if there's other people you know of who maybe you can't tell me they have a problem, but you can tell them to call me, and we're gonna help it out. So that was fine. I will say though, like sometimes sharing around the office, because in medicine there's a lot of stigma too that like, and here's my air quotes, we should know better. And there's no two ways about it. We should know better. And like I'm as a specialist, I'm a psychiatrist. Like I really should know better. And yet the numbers say we struggle all the time. So people don't want to say something, don't want to speak up. So there's some part of me saying like, hey, we should. But I've also been at the point of occasionally sharing a little too much in the workplace with people I know where it can get a little uncomfortable for some folks who like, they're like, that's great. I'm glad for you, but maybe not talk about this here and now. And I have to be mindful of that. And for me, as I've gotten further into it, it's a little bit like sharing some of the lessons I've learned. What are the strengths? How do I approach the world? Not just with regard to alcohol, but everything else. How can I learn to like let things go or focus on cleaning my side of the street, as it were, like all this stuff. And it doesn't have to apply just to drink. Like in my work, it happens all the time for other topics. And then if people want to ask like, hey, how are you? So I don't know that people really think I'm all that relaxed at work, but if they want to ask about it, like, hey, here's where I learned some of this stuff. Now I do sometimes talk to people too that where I work, mental health and addictions are treated in slightly different areas. We have some addiction specialists, but I'd say like for the rest of us in mental health, like you should know the basics about alcohol addiction because it's super common. But like I tell people, like listen to some of like these speaker tapes and learn some stories, learn some of the lingo. You'll sound like you know what you're talking about a lot more. And I think there's definitely some people who can read between the lines of like, okay, you know an awful lot of those phrases and stories. You're really into it. And I kind of want that to be okay too. To be like, yeah, you can come ask me. Do you want to ask me professionally? When you ask me personally, either way is fine. I'm happy to talk about it. Um, and like I'm happy. Like I go to work events. I don't drink, even when other people are. I don't get a lot of comments about it, but I don't mind saying like I just don't drink. Like it doesn't have to be this whole story for me anymore. So for me now, it's about finding the balance of being ready to talk about it, but also minding my spaces of when is it really appropriate and when is it not. Um, and I'm really not on social media, so like I don't have a place otherwise to post it. But like I talked about it with some of my extended family as well, and other places like this where, um, yeah, I think it's important to be open about it and not run and hide from it. Yeah.
I love the cross section we have right here. That's of people who've joined us who've like they're so different but so similar kind of all at the same time. Right? There's this really cool like I'm saying it when I'm ready to say it. I'm ready to talk about it when I'm ready to talk about it. And there's every single freaking one of us had a fear. We all there was all fear like what was going to happen to me, what was going to happen to me at work, what was going to same thing happened to me except for I just ran like a bull in a china shop right at it. Because on day one, I called up work and it was much like what John was talking about was as if I said something about it immediately that I had a problem, I felt that I was more protected because I was standing in front of it as I was going to be if I stood behind it and something happened.
Mhm.
So in my naivety, because that's really what it was and naivety and desperation. I wanted to make sure I was protected, so I thought that was the best route. And then I figured I would tell HR. I called up work the morning after I decided to quit, hung over as hell as all hell, and said, "I have a problem with alcohol. I've got a bad problem with alcohol. I'm going to get some help. I need your support. I don't know what that's going to look like. And that was my message to my work, my HR, and my boss. It was my message to my parents because I called them. It was my message to her parents because I spoke to them. And that was the beginning of me not being near as afraid, but me actually grabbing a whole crap ton of accountability that I didn't understand what I was doing when I was doing it.
Mm.
It wasn't until we started this podcast where it really got loud because I posted that we were starting this thing on social media. And until then, I really never had any social media content. I avoided social media big time. And I knew that when I posted that, everybody at work was going to know. And everybody, like, you know what happens at work. The rumor mill starts and it does its thing. And I stayed out of it as much as I could. But as soon as I went public with it as soon as I had a podcast, I had no choice. I mean, that was my choice. My choice was this is how it was going to be. And I was going to start sharing that. It was kind of on my own terms because I decided to do the thing that I'm doing right now still. So it was the thing I thought I had to do. But what it did was very much what Kristyna was talking about. It was somebody that was recovering out loud that inspired you to be where you are right now. I never had that, but I was able to give that to other people. That I would be sitting in my office at work. And even though that was an uncomfortable space for me a lot of times, every once in a blue moon, someone would come knock on my door and be like, "Hey, can we talk?" And I'd have conversations with people about a porn addiction, about another problem that they were having, that they were way too ashamed to have a conversation with anybody else because they knew I had something that held me in shame.
Mhm.
They knew I was dealing with a problem because I spoke about it. I wasn't quiet, but I didn't hold a megaphone to it at work either, but it was known. And because it was known and because I had the courage to talk about it, it gave other people a little bit of the courage to look past their shame and find out what was holding them back. And so recovering out loud, as scary as it was, because I was terrified. How is this going to affect my job? How is this going to affect my relationship with my wife? How is this going to affect a lot of things? And it's been way more rewarding than the fear than the value I gave the fear at all. Like it's been way better on this side of it than it was hiding behind the shame of it and being quiet.
You know,
That
okay.
I was just gonna say that's my story right there, was the hiding behind it and being quiet. Like, I was sober for over a year the first time I quit drinking, and I didn't tell a soul. Like, I was not even gonna go to an AA meeting because I live in a really small town, and there's nothing anonymous about AA when you live in a town of 300 people. And so, like, nobody knew because I was so ashamed. I'm like, and, John, you talk about that you should know better, that physicians have, but I think there's a lot of us in different places. Like, we should know better, right? Like, I was raised in the church and I was raised with a really strong moral background, and therefore I should know better. We all know it doesn't really work that way. We all know better. We're all still here, right? But I had so much shame. So the second time I quit drinking, I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to start talking to somebody about it. And I mean, it wasn't 3 months in that I was like, okay, well, I'm ready to start hosting a meeting. And then Steve and I were like, hey, we should start a podcast. And I remember it was January 1st for me. And we had decided we were gonna start a podcast. And so I was like, okay, well, like I was gonna blast it to all of my people before they found my podcast and then could gossip about it, like kind of cover your ass sort of thing. But God, it was so hard to hit post on that first Facebook post. And it wasn't anything dramatic. It was just like, hey, I quit drinking a year ago and I feel amazing. And this is, it's super cool. If anybody wants to talk, in here. It was a pretty minimal post. Um, I got so many comments on that Facebook post, and I hadn't been on social media for over a year. I got like 60 or 80 comments Everything was so positive. Everything was so supportive. Messages from people wanting to know how I did it and what advice I could give them, all of that. I guess one thing I wanted to ask you guys was, has anybody had a really negative experience in talking openly about addiction and about your own experiences?
Is mine's I gotta put mine into context. So I do a lot of government affairs work for us, lobbying for laws and funding for programs, right? So in Georgia at our General Assembly, we had a very large 73-page bill for mental health and addiction. And it was gonna put a lot of money behind peer-led programs and clinical programs, and it's a big deal. And it was before the Health and Human Services Committee. Now, you gotta understand, I used to work for the state senate on their staff.
On the other side of it.
I was a staff member for the Senate. Now I'm testifying before it in support of this bill. And it's the room is full. There's these people that are there against the bill. And this lady gets up and look, she's a great American and she's participating in democracy and the process, and she had every right to her opinion. And this is her opinion. She said, Jeff Breedlove, by name, wants this bill passed so that he can get taxpayer funds for his drug addict friends and they can go buy drugs that we pay for. And she said that in public at the Capitol in front of the media, knowing the meeting's being streamed in 2023. She had no problem saying that.
Wow.
And to me, and the chairman of the committee, he's like, should I, because that's against the rules. And I was like, no, let her go, let her say that. And now we have her on tape. And when we tell business leaders and elected officials and faith leaders that there's stigma out there, which is a polite word for hate and discrimination, and that people call us those people and they say we don't deserve funding and bills and rules and regulations that support us, they go, well, give me an example. But now we have an example. And God bless her for being that example, because that's who she wanted to be that day. But I've encountered people that go to Washington or in state capitals, county commission meetings, and they use zoning laws to keep recovery facilities out of their community because they don't want those criminals coming into their neighborhood. But outside of those governmental settings, what I've noticed is that a vast majority of people want to help, want to be supportive. They don't know how to be supportive sometimes. Sometimes they do. But I found out that most of the stigma out there revolves around misconceptions based out of faith or political values that they haven't segregated into the real world yet. But in the real world, with regular people in regular settings, I found most people want to be supportive of us.
That's a great story.
Christine,
I don't-
go ahead, John.
I was going to say, like, I haven't had any negative experiences, but the thing I'm going to say earlier was one of the things I think about being open about is how we identify ourselves. And I know the term alcoholic is sometimes a fraught term for people to accept, but I actually prefer that in part because I'm saying, like, we all know alcoholics. We may not know we know alcoholics, but like it's important not just for other people who have addiction in their story, but for the people around them. Be like, oh yeah, I know an alcoholic or two that like they're regular people. They're doing fine on the outside of, and I think it speaks to Jeff's point. Like when you know people like this, you're like, oh yeah, it's my neighbor. It's the parent of the kid on my kid's basketball team. Like it's something like that. And I think that's the other part. It's not just inspiring people, but making the rest of the community feel comfortable because they're like, oh yeah, I knew you before and things were okay. And I think sometimes our language too, we sometimes get very discreet. I had a drinking problem, but being like, no, it was not just a little problem. It was the whole deal. And it's I think I've had some people be awkward about it, but not negative.
I was just gonna say I had a friend who once in the very beginning had said to me that I was more fun when I drank. And, it didn't really upset me because I feel like she was just joking. But, it's kind of like that's actually one of the things that I was most afraid of with, talking about it was that I wasn't going to be fun anymore and I didn't know how to have fun anymore. But I mean through this I've just learned different ways to have actually that wasn't even fun before. It's what I've realized like when I am at an event where it, other people are drinking and it's like this isn't fun and I'm ready to go. So it's just different now, but and I'm still friends with her and I hang out with her here and there, but yeah, it was a little bit hurtful, but I knew she was kidding and we've been friends a long time, so
That's cool. I'm glad you guys are still friends after that.
Yeah, for sure. What I was gonna say was John was talking about language being discreet, and sometimes I think I find it interesting that you have no problems with the word alcoholic. I don't have any problems with the word alcoholic either. If you look on my social media, my original name was the open alcoholic, and now it's the recovered alcoholic. But I still have that in there. I'm very easily identifiable. You know what my problem was, right? And and I don't think it's near a problem with the word. And Jeff, you talk about stigma. It's the stigma that surrounds the word. The word isn't, I don't think, a bad word overall. It just identifies a problem that I used to have. And what it does is it allows somebody else to identify with where I used to be really, really easily, as opposed to softening this term to not insult people or to not hurt their feelings, which we take into, I feel like, almost extreme consideration sometimes. And it starts to get difficult because the water gets muddied a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah.
I side noted there.
No, I think that the terms that we use as a community, and I mean, one term. So I'm at New York City. I'm meeting these business people, and this man, he's very successful. Interrupts me and he says, "Can I ask you a question?" For you, yes, sir. What's a peer? And I'm like, well, a peer, it's a person. And he said, "Do you mean like a survivor of addiction?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." And he's like, "Well, I don't know what a peer is, but I know somebody that survived cancer, and you survived this." So I learned, this guy taught me that all these words that we use, to Steve's point, sometimes to extreme to not hurt our own feelings, our own brothers and sisters' feelings. It's out in the real world, they don't know what the heck we're talking about sometimes. And to me, I've come to peace with I don't care what words anybody uses. I respect the rules of the house. So if I'm in an AA meeting or an NA meeting, you know, I use those words. If I'm at a meeting where I know they prefer personally and long-term recovery, that's what I say. But I also think that, to John's point, real people identify, if we say alcoholic, to John's point, they go, yeah, I know, they know what that means. And that actually can be helpful. So I do think words are important, but I also think sometimes we put too much importance on them that we forget that a majority of America is sort of outside of the disease, and we've got to remember to communicate with them as well.
Oh, I know that if I say I have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, anybody in the recovery community is gonna be like, "Uh-huh." And anybody outside is gonna be like, "Huh, well, that's interesting." Like,
Yeah, that's the difference between the response of, "Yeah, you know what? I drink too much on the Saturdays too,"
right,
right?
exactly.
As opposed to, "Oh, yeah,
Right.
so what are you doing about it?" You know? Changes a little bit.
Yeah.
Corey, did you face any fears at all?
Um, with sharing about it, or
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, these last so we launched Soba January 1st, and leading up to it, I was basically just a raw nerve, I've never really been as honest and vulnerable about my recovery up until till a couple days ago, really. And um, you know, um, I guess the other not the other side, but just something that I think is a reality for people to think about is, you know, w- we're all fucked up, and people who are, sober and not, we're all working on ourselves and trying the best we can, whether you're in recovery or not. But I was I'll speak for myself. I was a liability. I was a huge liability, and there were many times in my life where I said I was going to stop and I couldn't. And there were many times where I had obligations in my life to go to work or go to school, and I couldn't meet those obligations. And um I let a lot of people down, and I just think you know, I think with you, Steve, and I have a buddy, one of somebody I've mentored for a decade plus, it was very important for him to hold himself accountable very early on, and tell as many people that would listen. And he's 12 years sober now, and my experience was different. I kind of kept it to myself a little bit, and talked about it when I was asked. I mean, most of my friends knew that I went to rehab, because I was just an absolute wreck. And they also saw me change completely. And, with regard to people asking me about it and coming to me for help, it's like one of the best blessings I can do in my life, and with Soba and being more vocal about this, and like we talked about before, the sort of changing of the tides and the cultures shifting. That's what I hope there are people out there that listen to our stories and they say, I don't have to be in pain anymore. I don't have to, they'll be in other pain. There'll be in other emotional pain.
It'll never stop. It's a new pain.
Even new
It's a good pain, right?
It's a good pain. It's funny because I heard Steve-O say something the other day. It was like a clip that was going around in the recovery community about, like, you're real. I'm gonna butcher it, so forgive me, but it's like, you don't realize that it isn't until you stop drinking is when you realize how much of a problem you have with drinking. And it's like sobriety's. He says something like sobriety's my problem. Drinking's not my problem. And being in my own skin is my problem. So for people that are listening who are struggling, like, you know, it's an amazing experience, and it's given me an ability to look at myself and challenge myself, and I couldn't do that without being sober. So yeah.
It's tough. I think everyone is going to have some sort of negative experience that's going to come along with the positive experience. To varying degrees, we're going to see both ends of the spectrum. And I think for some people it shows up earlier than it does later, and vice versa. So all of our experiences, I think I'm just going to wrap this up, but I think all of our experiences, I said this earlier too, have differences and similarities. And I'm going to point out a couple of the things that each one of you said, but Corey, you talked about overcoming the shame and the guilt. Common similarity between all of us is, before even speaking about it outside of our inner realm, is when we bring it outside into the world, we, through facing that fear, we become a resource. And people start using us to ask questions to help them with whatever they're dealing with. And it's our vulnerability in that moment that gives somebody else the courage to come to you and ask those questions. Jeff, you talked about recovering out loud on your terms, on your timeline. Like, you didn't really have much of a choice there, but the story you told, I think it was about your brother-in-law, your cousin. The story you told about your cousin was, and I think Corey is an example of this too, because he did this on his timeline, and he did this on his terms. We've all done it on our terms, but the timelines have been very, very different. Kristyna, you talked about it was someone who was recovering out loud that inspired you to do what you're doing now, and approaching your boss, and approaching and contacting your friend before coming on here, being the inspiration to be sober in 200 plus days. That in itself is amazing, because she found the courage, and then you found it because of that. And John, you talked about having that conversation with your boss at 90 days, and you talked about the stigma associated in the workplace, and especially you being a professional, and Jeff, you as well, right, in the workplace, but you being a professional, and how the story of it affecting someone else and their past giving you that sense of fear of, oh my God, this is how this is going to have to happen for me to get so this wasn't a problem anymore, and you found a different way, and you also found a way to speak about it and find the courage. This is going to be a common theme, I guess, here in this closing out, is finding the courage.
Yeah.
You find the courage to quit, and eventually on your own timeline, and when you feel like you're ready, you find the courage to start being a voice for the people that don't have one yet. So I want to say thank you, Kristyna. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Corey. And thank you, John, for joining us today and sharing your experiences on recovering out loud. So maybe someone that listens to this might have the courage to do it too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To our listeners, thanks for being here. If you love this episode, make sure you check out episode 14, Recovery Out Loud. It's another great conversation about normal people who decided to go public with their sobriety stories. That will give you the courage to do the same. We'll see you next week.